They called him ruthless, the kind of man who could fire an entire department before lunch and still make it to a charity gala with a perfect smile. But behind the glass walls and boardroom applause, there was a silence no one dared to break, because power, once absolute, can be its own kind of prison. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. The city shimmered beneath the early morning rain, silver streaks running down the mirrored towers of Harrison and Vale, one of the largest investment firms in New York. Inside, the elevator whispered upward with quiet precision, carrying Ethan Vale, the man whose name crowned the building itself. He had built empires out of risk, carved his fortune from the bones of fallen competitors. Yet today, as the elevator doors opened onto the top floor, something felt different. The usual confidence in his stride seemed rehearsed, too practiced, as if he were walking through a version of himself that no longer fit. In the open-plan office, whispers followed him like static. Screens glowed with numbers, the hum of ambition filled the air, and eyes flickered between spreadsheets and the man whose empire had begun to tremble. "He lost the Shanghai deal," someone murmured near the glass partition. "The board's furious," another replied. "Maybe it's time the king learned to bleed." Ethan heard them, of course. He always did, but he kept walking, the soles of his shoes silent on the marble floor. At the end of the corridor stood Ryan Corbett, his chief operations officer, and the kind of man who smiled like a friend but struck like a rival. He was younger, charming, with the easy arrogance of someone who'd never known real loss. "Morning, boss," Ryan said, leaning against the doorframe of the CEO's office. "Quite the storm out there. Weather's wild, too." Ethan looked at him, expression unreadable. "Storms are only dangerous if you don't know how to build shelter." Ryan chuckled softly. "Let's hope your shelter still stands by tonight's meeting. The board's eager to hear your explanations." That smirk lingered. Too long, too confident. Ethan brushed past him and entered his office, closing the glass door behind him. Outside, the city pulsed with life, unaware that inside those walls, an empire was beginning to crack. He loosened his tie, looked at his reflection in the window, and for a moment saw not the mogul or the headline, but the man, tired, haunted, alone. And behind him, through the transparent glass, the staff moved like shadows, watching, waiting, whispering. But while the room laughed, the outsider's eyes shimmered faintly, as if holding a truth no one could yet see. By the time the boardroom filled that evening, the rain had turned to glassy sheets against the windows, painting the skyline in fractured reflections. The table stretched endlessly, polished to a mirror shine, one that caught the faces of men and women who once praised Ethan Vale as untouchable. Now, they looked at him as though he were a remnant of a fallen dynasty. He sat at the head of the table, silent. The screens behind him flickered with red numbers, losses, projections, the slow bleed of a company that had fed on perfection and finally tasted failure. Ryan Corbett stood at the far end, his confidence radiating like heat. He had a presentation open, the kind that dazzled and deceived in equal measure. "We've all seen the reports," Ryan began, pacing slowly. "Our Shanghai merger collapsed, the investors are panicking, and the media's calling it Vale's fall. But I think this is an opportunity. Maybe it's time for new leadership." A murmur rippled across the table. Someone coughed. Another pretended to check their phone. Ethan didn't move. Ryan continued, a predator in a tailored suit. "The truth is, we've relied too long on old strategies, on your name. But names don't build futures. Numbers do. And right now, your numbers are bleeding." A few executives nodded reluctantly. Others looked away, unwilling to meet the CEO's eyes. Ethan's voice, when it finally came, was low, steady. "You're suggesting a coup, then?" Ryan smiled, almost politely. "I'm suggesting accountability." He turned to the board. "Let's give him a chance to prove his relevance. One last test." Public. Laughter. Uneasy at first, then growing. The board members exchanged looks, half amusement, half cruelty. "What kind of test?" asked one of the directors. Ryan gestured toward the display. "Tomorrow morning, we have the Investor Summit at the Conrad Hotel. Over 200 stakeholders, press, cameras. Let him present our recovery plan live. No notes, no rehearsals, just brilliance or disaster, gasps, a few smirks." The cruelty was elegant. Ethan understood the trap immediately. A live presentation without preparation meant humiliation. One stumble, one crack in his composure, and the empire he'd built would eat him alive. Ryan leaned closer, his tone almost playful. "Or, if you'd prefer, you can step down tonight and let me take the stage instead. Save yourself the embarrassment." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. The rain outside struck the glass like applause. Ethan looked at the faces around him, men and women who had once bowed at his command, now waiting for him to fall. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. His eyes met Ryan's, steady and unreadable. "I'll be there at 9. Ryan's smirk widened. "Then may the best man win." No one believed they would even try. But the silence that followed and spread across the hall like fire. The night stretched long over Manhattan, restless and cold. The lights of the city pulsed like thoughts that refused to quiet. Each window a story of someone still awake, still fighting. In the top floor of Harrison and Vale, Ethan Vale sat alone beneath the ghostly hum of fluorescent light. The office that once felt like a throne now resembled a courtroom. Every framed award on the wall, every glossy photo of success seemed to testify against him. He stared at the blank screen in front of him. The words wouldn't come. His father's watch ticked quietly beside the laptop. A gift from a man who'd built nothing and lost everything, yet taught Ethan the one lesson no business school had ever mentioned. You don't own power. You borrow it from those who still believe in you. And tonight, no one did. A soft knock broke the silence. The door opened just enough for a woman's voice to enter. "Mr. Vale?" It was Claire Bennett, his executive assistant. She had joined the company 2 years ago. Quiet and efficient. The kind of presence people barely noticed until she was gone. Ethan didn't look up. "Go home, Claire. It's late." "You should too," she said gently, stepping closer. "Tomorrow's important." He gave a dry laugh. "Important? It's an execution, not a meeting." She hesitated, then placed a folder on his desk. "I thought you might want this. The latest internal reports, and something else." Ethan raised a brow. "Something else?" Claire drew in a breath. "I found something odd in the Shanghai files. The merger didn't fail because of market volatility. Someone leaked our projections before the signing." He froze. Slowly, his eyes met hers. "You're sure?" "There's an encrypted trace leading back to an internal account. I didn't want to say anything until I was certain. But it wasn't you who lost that deal, Mr. Vale. Someone wanted it to look like you did." The words hit like lightning through fog. A sharpness returned to Ethan's gaze, something dangerously alive. He leaned forward. "Who?" Claire shook her head. "I can't prove it yet. But if I had to guess, someone who benefits from your fall." Ethan's mind turned, gears awakening. The betrayal, the sudden confidence in Ryan's voice, the public challenge. It all began to align. Claire stepped back, uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." He stood abruptly, crossing to the window. The city stretched below him, cold, glittering, merciless, but within its glass reflections, a faint spark of resolve flickered. "Don't be sorry," he said quietly. "Be ready. Tomorrow, we stop apologizing." For the first time in weeks, a thin smile touched his lips. Claire watched him, still the same man who once ruled without mercy, yet somehow different now. There was something human beneath the armor, something the world had never seen. And as he turned back to the city lights, it wasn't just anger that burned behind his eyes, it was purpose. And just when everyone thought he would break, something was revealed that no one expected. Morning came sharp and brilliant, the kind of autumn light that exposes every flaw, every imperfection. The Conrad Hotel glittered on the Hudson like a crown of glass and ambition. Inside, the main conference hall was a cathedral of wealth. Rows of investors in dark suits, cameras poised, murmurs swelling like the tide before a storm. Ethan Vale entered through the side door, unnoticed at first. He wore a charcoal suit, unadorned, his tie slightly loosened, a deliberate contrast to the man he used to be. Behind him walked Claire, carrying nothing but a tablet and a quiet determination that outshone any accessory. Ryan Corbett was already on stage, greeting reporters, shaking hands like a man born for the spotlight. When he spotted Ethan, his grin sharpened. "Mr. Vale!" "You actually came?" Ryan said, voice dripping with mock surprise. "I was beginning to think you'd lost your courage along with the Shanghai deal." The laughter from the crowd was quick and cruel. Cameras flashed. Ethan didn't reply. He simply adjusted his cufflinks and took his place at the podium. The stage lights were merciless. Every movement, every breath magnified. Across the room, the board members whispered like spectators at a duel. Ryan leaned toward him, low enough for only Ethan to hear. "Remember, one mistake, one hesitation, and you're finished." Ethan turned slightly, his tone calm. "Then I suppose I'll have to be flawless." The room quieted. He began to speak, not with the booming authority they expected, but with the quiet clarity of a man who had finally stopped pretending. "For years, we built this company on fear. Fear of losing, fear of change, fear of appearing weak. I was part of that. I led with arrogance because I thought strength meant control. But control without purpose is just another kind of failure." A ripple passed through the audience. Even Ryan blinked, uncertain for the first time. Ethan tapped the screen beside him, and a graph appeared. Steady, measured, undeniable. "You've all seen the reports about the Shanghai merger. What you haven't seen," he continued, "is why it failed." He paused. The projection shifted, revealing lines of encrypted data, traced and decoded. Claire watched from the side, her pulse racing. "Someone inside this company leaked our projections to a rival firm 48 hours before signing. The failure wasn't market-driven, it was manufactured." Gasps broke through the hall, the sound of phones snapping photos, of whispers turning sharp. Ryan laughed, forced. "That's a bold accusation, Ethan. Without proof—" "I have proof," Ethan interrupted, his voice like tempered steel. The next slide displayed a digital trail ending in one name, Ryan Corbett. The room froze. Ryan's smile faltered, the mask slipping. "This is absurd." "It's tragic," Ethan said softly. "You had talent, vision, opportunity, but you wanted my fall more than the company's rise. Every camera caught the moment Ryan's composure shattered. His charm dissolved into fury. You think they'll believe you, after everything you've cost them?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence from the audience spoke louder than any words. In that stillness, something irreversible shifted. The power that once belonged to arrogance now belonged to truth. And for the first time, Ethan felt it. Not victory, but peace. Ryan's voice cracked, desperate. "You can't prove intent. This doesn't—" "It's not about intent anymore, Ryan." Ethan said. It's about integrity, something numbers can't measure. He stepped away from the podium. The applause began hesitantly, then grew, a sound that filled the hall like the breaking of a spell. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted, but none of it reached him. He walked down the stage steps beside Claire, the world around them blurring into background noise. It wasn't just skill, it was dignity. And suddenly, silence fell across the crowd. The fallout was immediate. By noon, Ryan Corbett's name flooded the news feeds, flashing across financial channels like a cautionary tale. Corporate betrayal exposed at Harrison & Vale. CEO Ethan Vale strikes back. But while the world consumed the scandal, Ethan found no satisfaction in it. He stood alone in his office, watching the headlines scroll across the glass of the skyscraper opposite. The city was loud again, the noise of ambition returning like the tide, but inside him, there was only quiet. Claire entered silently, holding a cup of coffee. "They've removed Ryan from the board," she said. "The directors voted unanimously. You're in the clear." Ethan nodded, eyes still on the skyline. "No one's ever in the clear here. They just stop aiming for a while." She hesitated, then stepped closer. "You did what was right." He turned to her then, for the first time seeing her not as an assistant or an employee, but as someone who had stood beside him when everyone else turned away. "Did I?" he asked softly. "I exposed him. Yes, but if I'm honest, maybe I created him. Maybe all that arrogance I carried just found another face to wear." Claire studied him, the weariness behind his words. "Maybe. But you faced it. Most people spend their whole lives pretending they're the hero of their story. You had the courage to admit you weren't. For a moment, neither spoke. The city glowed beneath them, pale and infinite. Then Ethan said, "You should take a few days off. God knows you've earned it." She smiled faintly. "What about you?" He gave a small shrug. "I wouldn't know what to do with silence." Claire turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Maybe that's exactly what you need. Silence isn't empty, Ethan. Sometimes it's just waiting for someone brave enough to listen." She left him with that thought. Hours later, when the building was empty, Ethan found himself walking through the lower floors, the ones he hadn't visited in years, departments he used to pass without notice. He stopped near the custodial hallway, where the lights flickered faintly. A janitor, an older man with gray hair, looked up from mopping the floor. "Mr. Vale? Didn't expect to see you down here?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I didn't expect to be here either." The man chuckled. "Well, floors need cleaning whether you're winning or losing. Guess that's true for all of us, huh?" Ethan nodded slowly. "More than you know." He slipped his hand into his pocket and pulled out his father's watch, the one that had ticked beside him through every rise and every fall. For years, it had been a symbol of control, of time conquered. But now, it just felt human. He turned it over once, then looked at the janitor. "Do you have a son?" "Two," the man said proudly. "Both working hard, not much, but honest." Ethan placed the watch gently on the cart beside him. "Then maybe this belongs to someone like you." The man blinked, startled. "Sir, I can't—" "You can," Ethan said, "because I think it's time I stopped trying to own every minute of my life. Maybe I should start earning them instead." And for the first time in years, Ethan Vale walked out of his own building without feeling like he had to be seen. The next morning, news outlets hailed him as the CEO who reclaimed his soul. Investors called it a masterstroke of strategy, but those who'd been in that room knew better. It wasn't strategy. It was surrender, the kind that only the truly strong can make. But the final blow came not from power. It came from a truth everyone had tried to forget. Weeks passed. The storm faded from headlines, but its echo lingered in the corners of the company, the whispered apologies, the wary respect, the quiet recalibration of power. Ethan Vale returned to work, but not as the same man. The office still bore his name, the empire still bent to his will, yet something had shifted, subtle, irreversible. He spent more time listening than speaking now. Meetings that once thundered with his voice now moved like conversation, not command. People met his eyes. Some, for the first time, smiled without fear. Claire noticed the difference before anyone else. He no longer seemed to walk through the building as if the walls belonged to him. He moved like someone who had finally understood that everything he touched was borrowed. One evening, after most of the staff had gone home, she found him in the break room, pouring coffee from the same pot everyone used. A simple, human act that would have been unthinkable months before. "You could afford better coffee," she teased lightly. He looked up, smiling faintly. "Maybe it's not about the coffee. Maybe it's about remembering where you drink it." She leaned against the counter. "You're becoming poetic, Mr. Vale. Should I be worried?" "Terrified," he said with a smirk. Then softer, "You were right. You know, about silence. I thought it meant emptiness. But it's where the truth hides when we're too loud to hear it." She watched him for a long moment, seeing the gentleness that had replaced his old armor. There was still strength in him, but now it was quiet, deliberate, kind. "So what now?" she asked. He looked out the window. The skyline shimmered, the same city that had once reflected his pride now mirroring his peace. "Now," he said slowly, "I start over. Build something that doesn't need to be feared to be respected. Something honest." Claire tilted her head. "You mean a company?" Ethan met her gaze. "I mean a life." A silence settled between them. Comfortable, unhurried. The kind that only two people who have seen each other's worst can share. Then he said, almost shyly, "I was thinking of taking a few days away from the city, the lake house in Vermont. It's quiet there." "That sounds nice," Claire replied. He smiled. "Would you come with me? I could use someone who knows how to tell the truth when I start lying to myself again." Her answer came not with words, but with a nod and a look that said everything words couldn't. The next morning, the office buzzed as usual. Emails, calls, the rhythm of ambition resuming its endless song. But when people realized their CEO's office was empty, no one panicked. They just smiled, quietly, as if the building itself understood that something sacred was finally being restored. And as Ethan and Claire drove north, leaving the city lights behind, the past dissolved like mist in the rearview mirror. And as they walked away, no one dared laugh again. For they finally understood what they had witnessed. The lake was quiet at dawn. Mist curled above the water like breath made visible, and the air smelled of pine and rain. Ethan Vale stood at the edge of the wooden dock, hands in his pockets, watching the sun rise through a sky still bruised from night. Behind him, the old cabin creaked softly, its windows golden from the fire Claire had lit inside. Somewhere, a kettle whistled. Somewhere, peace felt like something that could be touched. It had been months since the scandal, and yet the world seemed to have turned with a gentler rhythm. Harrison and Vale still existed, but Ethan no longer ran it. He had stepped down quietly, shocking everyone but himself. He left the company to a younger team, one built on collaboration instead of fear. He had taken something far rarer with him: humility. Claire joined him on the dock, her sweater wrapped tight against the cool morning air. She handed him a mug of coffee, steam rising like memory. "Still can't believe you walked away from all that power," she said softly. He took the mug, smiling. Maybe that's the only way to really have it. She sat beside him, legs dangling over the water. Do you miss it? He thought for a moment. Sometimes the noise, the speed, the illusion that you matter more because people pretend you do. But then mornings like this remind me, I'd rather be real than remembered. They sat in silence, the kind that heals instead of hurts. A pair of swans glided across the lake, the surface rippling gently behind them. Claire broke the silence, her tone thoughtful. You know, when I first started working for you, I used to be terrified. You were like a shadow that filled the whole floor. Ethan laughed quietly. I remember. I didn't notice anyone was afraid. That's exactly why they were, she said with a smile. He looked at her, warmth in his eyes. And you? I was afraid too. But I stayed because I saw someone who wanted to be more than the name on the building. He turned toward her then, truly seeing her. The wind brushed through her hair, the light touching her face as if the morning itself had paused to listen. Claire, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I could have done any of this without you. She smiled. I think you could have. You just didn't want to anymore. For a moment, their hands brushed, fingers uncertain but drawn together all the same. It wasn't the beginning of a fairy tale. It was something better. Two people who had seen the worst in life and still chose to stay soft. Later that day, Ethan opened a letter from the board. Inside was a single line from one of the oldest directors. You reminded us what leadership is supposed to look like. He folded the letter and placed it on the mantel, beside his father's watch, the one the janitor had later returned by mail with a note that simply read, You earned this back. Outside, the lake shimmered beneath the sunlight. The world hadn't changed, not really. But somehow, it felt possible again, like mercy had found its way back into the human story. Ethan closed his eyes, listening to the wind through the trees. It no longer sounded like noise. It sounded like peace. In a world blinded by arrogance, sometimes a single act of quiet dignity is enough to change the course of history. And sometimes, the greatest victory isn't in conquering others, but in learning to forgive yourself.